Hey guys, Ariel over here at Fineth, where today I am making chokecherry juice. If you're not familiar with them, they grow, as far as I know, across a lot of the country. Across a lot of America, I believe across Europe, and I'm not sure where else in the world. They're a very small little, looks like a berry, but these guys are in the cherry family. If you're familiar with the actual IDing of a cherry, the bark and branch and wood and leaves all look very much like a cherry. And if you eat one of these, they've got a very cherry-like pit in there. It is a cherry-like taste. There's a reason they're called chokecherries. They are pretty tart. These are very dead ripe, so they're not even that tart anymore, but they still have a little bit of like a chalky taste to them. But they are super nutritious and they grow everywhere, and like all the other berries in this area this year, we have had a crazy record crop of them. So a friend and I went berry picking last evening. It was gorgeous, and picked this entire bucket full of berries, and this thing is actually seriously heavy. And berry or cherry picking is just always more fun when you go with friends. So the first thing I'm going to do is wash them. Just because as we picked in here, you know, they're so ripe they're just kind of like falling off as you go. And we got little bits of leaves and a few cherries that were already kind of dried up because we're getting to the very end of the season here. I did make a batch of chokecherry juice earlier in the year. This will probably be my last one. Oh yeah, and there's some different colors. We found 3 trees that had like this. If you're familiar with the difference between like a Rainier cherry, they're like the golden and red cherries versus a dark Bing cherry. I found the same thing here with some chokecherries. There were some golden and red ones, so it's just a couple little trees or bushes. Chokecherries grow more like a big bush, like up to 40-something feet in the air at times, but not really a full tree like a Bing cherry. I'm just dumping all my cherries into my sink here. I'm going to fill it up with water. Okay, in my sink here, you can see the mixture of dark and light cherries. And you can see how if I just kind of gently stir them in the water, I wanted to make sure the water level was higher than them, how all these little floaty things float to the top. I usually use 2 hands, but that's bits of leaves and grass, any kind of dried up. Like I said, there was some cherries that were like already kind of done and dried up. They tend to float with most wild berries. I've done this with chokecherries, with elderberries, with currants, huckleberries, whatever it is. This is easier to do with 2 hands, but even little stems like that I got in there when we were picking, they float. But all this stuff will float to the top, and you could use a little strainer of some kind or whatever, but I can usually just skim that off with my hands. And that lets me get most of the dirt out of the cherry, and it tends to, if you do that, it tends to collect around the edges as well. And then some of the bigger chunks will get kind of stuck down in the mass of berries, because I've got a lot of berries or cherries in here. So if I kind of stir it, then any little leaf bits or whatever that were being held down by a cherry float to the surface. And it looks like I'm skimming off some of the actual cherries there at times, but any that are floating are dried up or maybe have a little bug hole that let air get into them or something else. So pretty much if it floats, I don't want it. Then you don't have to pick every single bit of berry or dirt off the berries. Then I kind of just reach in and rattle them around again like that and pick up a handful. I'm dropping them in my strainer here to drain the water off of them. But picking up a handful, aren't those colors just beautiful? Like that, making sure I don't see any, you know, big grass stems or anything that got stuck into there. And I'm just going to go through my whole sink and pile them into here. Okay, so I've piled one strainer full of berries up here. My strainer isn't quite as big as my berry pile, so I have to do this in a few batches. And I just set a plate under there to catch the drips, just because that's one disadvantage of having my butcher block counters, which I otherwise really like. You don't want a bunch of water sitting on them, even though I oil them regularly. It kind of soaks in and damages the wood over time. So I am just going to see if I can, without spilling too many, pour my berries into there, pick up the couple I dropped, and going to actually just start these cooking. Now I want to add a little bit of water to get that going. Juice will start cooking out of those berries as soon as they start to heat up. But I'm just going to pour a cupful of water in there. Fire up my stove. And these will pretty quickly start soaking a lot of juice out of them. Now the reason that I don't run these through like my mill that you saw me use with like the currants is those cherry pits in there. They're so big, they're a little smaller for sure than like a big juicy Bing cherry, but they're so big that a strainer like that just isn't able to process a pit that big. It's not a tiny little seed like is in a raspberry or something like that. So what I'm going to do instead is cook them till they're soft, and then basically squeeze the massive pits out of there, and I'll show you that in a minute. But I was really surprised. This is the first year I've tried making chokecherry juice. So many reasons to do it. Like most other little dark berries, they're super nutritious, even with their tart puckery taste, which I don't mind by itself, but it is a little bit puckery. If you don't like that, I've enjoyed the juice mixed with like honey, or even a little bit of, there's a natural brewed ginger ale, not like a corn syrup and dye one, but like one with actual ginger that's a little bit fizzy. You mix part of that in with something really tart, like I like it with this, or cranberry juice or something like that. It is just an awesome, a little bit carbonated, mostly tart, a little bit sweet drink. Anyway, I was really surprised the first time I did this. The first batch I had all the dark cherries, none of the light ones. So I didn't find that tree till later. And as they cooked, I expected it to be a dark, like purpley syrup. I already canned some in here. What it came out with, I don't know how well the color will show up in here, is like this fuchsia pink juice, which is just really pretty. So I think that's what we're going to see here in a minute, though this batch might be a little bit lighter because it's got some of those lighter cherries in it. So while that starts to heat up, I'm just going to finish washing my cherries, the rest of the ones that are in my sink here. My second strainer full. And yeah, so many reasons to eat it. Almost all little berries and stuff are super rich in all kinds of flavonoids and micronutrients and minerals and vitamins, and I forget, I've looked up so many things recently. Google is your friend, you can quickly figure this stuff out, but I think these are like way higher in vitamin C than an orange. They've got way more potassium than a banana, and just all that kind of thing. So if you have never gotten into eating wild foods or growing your own, either way, these things are just so nutritious, and they're just growing out there. Like I said, chokecherries of some variety grow wild across much of the continent of America, I believe most of Europe, and possibly some other places in the world. But they're just growing out there, wild and free, and all it took me was, I don't even think we were out there for an hour picking cherries together. They pick a little faster than some kinds. Oh, still got a leaf. Like huckleberries are a much slower picking thing, but chokecherries are not bad at all. So, got this whole big heavy bucket full. And again, if I got a leaf or stem or two in here, that doesn't really worry me too much because I'm going to make a mess. And then I'm going to show you what I do to strain these out once they're cooked. And if I had a stem or something that I missed and was in there, it would get strained out with the pits as well. I'm just trying to strain out most of the dirt. Now, one thing you should be aware of is a little bit like a lot of other fruits we eat, like apples and such, peaches, plums, The pit on these has I forget what the technical name is. Basically, it has some cyanide in it. If you ate a massive amount of pits, it could definitely make you very ill or potentially kill you. But like I said, that's not something I'm really concerned about because of several things. The same is true of peach pits, apple seeds, all kinds of other things where we eat the fruit all the time. We just don't normally eat the seeds, at least not in any great volume. 1 or 2 isn't going to kill you. And it's the toxic part of that is really broken down when something is heated. And because the easiest way to get the juice out of these is to heat them a little bit, I'm really not worried at all about it. But just something to be aware of if you were planning to sit down with a bowl of chokecherries and eat the entire thing, seeds and all, which would be a little difficult because they're exactly like a cherry pit that you're used to, very hard and crunchy. So I've got a little bit more than 2 full strainers of cherries here, it looks like. Pick my last few little ones that are rolling around the bottom, trying to get away out of there. Okay, I think as soon as these start to cook down again, they will, the pile in the kettle will shrink a little bit, and I think that I'm going to be able to get all of this into one kettle. I could be wrong, but I believe so. Oh yeah, as soon as that starts to cook down, that'll be fine. Okie doke. So now that's going to get really boring there for a minute. Get another little leaf bit. So we're going to check back in a minute once this has time to heat through and you can start seeing the juice actually come out of these guys. Okay, if I'm quiet for a second, you can probably hear that that's starting to bubble under there. So if I can manage without dumping my slightly overly full kettle here, turn up some of the bottom berries in here, both because I want to make sure they don't actually burn under there. There should be enough moisture in the bottom to not do that. Oh, there I'm coming up with the first ones. You can see have started to pop. And that's just because the heat is breaking open their shells and their juice is starting to come out. And we're going to cook this until there you can see some more. I don't know how well the camera picks that up, but we're going to do this until all the berries in here have popped open like that and we can squash the juice off of those pits. Okay, so now this has been simmering for a little bit. Let me show you real quick here how much of that pretty pink juice we've got. If my friend Jess happens to watch this looks like the right shade of pink to dye a bunch of fabric for a dress for her, because I think she would love it. Anyway, you can still see there's a bunch of whole berries and a bunch of popped berries. We're going to speed them up with a potato masher, and we're just going to kind of squash them a little bit to help with getting all of the juice out of there. And again, if you have any around and you can go pick them, I highly recommend giving this a try. For one, it's beautiful, and I think picking wild berries is just fun as a recreation all on its own. And yeah, they're high in vitamin A, vitamin K, which is one that a lot of us don't get enough of. Like I said, potassium, magnesium, all those good things. So they were getting pretty juicy. It gets a little bit foamy there on top. Pretty bright pink, but I'm still seeing berries that are not popped. We popped a lot more with that potato masher. Just gonna let them simmer here for a few more minutes and do that a couple more times till I think all of the berries are popped, and then I will squeeze the juice out. Okay, so now we've got this mostly cooked down to mostly juice. So I've just put this strainer here over the pot, and I'm going to just start ladling my juice through this. And all of the, liquid juice that we've cooked off is running down into the pot. And the pits and any chunks, I'll show you what we do with those in a minute here, are going to stay on top. And this same method, that I'm doing this with chokecherries, but you could do the exact same thing with an awful lot of fruits or berries to make juice if you want. If you didn't have a, a juicer like I demonstrated using in the currant video, that I didn't want to cook the currants if I didn't need to because I wanted them to stay fresh, but you could certainly have done the same thing. So now this, got a bunch of juice in the bottom, but I've got a whole bunch of cherries, don't do that, here in the top, and I'm just going to take a big spoon and kind of mush them through the screen to make sure I get everything off of those cherry pits and get as much of the goodies out of this as I can. Now this is going to take just a little bit of time because I'm going to do a little batch here, dump the seeds in the compost, scoop some more out, do another batch, and so on. So I will check back with you guys when I am done with that. And come back tomorrow, guys, and I will show you how I can this stuff to preserve it for the winter, just so this video doesn't get too insanely long. Thanks for watching, folks. If you're interested in more info on my off-grid tiny house life, check out some of my other videos here. And if you like what you're seeing, click the little picture of my house to subscribe and then hit the little bell so YouTube actually notifies you every time there's a new video available. See y'all next time.